Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and if you're familiar with my content, you can probably tell I'm wearing something different than what I usually wear, which is actually the subject of this video. That is the Brigandine. What is the Brigandine? Some of you might be asking. Well, it's a very popular and effective type of medieval armor that is unfortunately overlooked in many adaptations of the medieval period, whether that's in fantasy or if it's actually based in a historical period, especially in the periods where the Brigandine was really popular. So often, it's completely ignored like it never existed, which is a crying shame because the Brigandine was actually one of the more prominent armors in the period in which it was used, both for the average soldier and even nobility. So it's time to try and bring the popularity and awareness of the Brigandine back into the mainstream, which is the purpose of this video. Now, you also might have noticed I'm not wearing my glasses because I wanted to make it more of an authentic experience. But how authentic is it? Because some of you might be questioning how accurate is the kit that I'm wearing. Well, I'm going to get into that later on in the video, okay, the detail. But before I go into that, I'm going to be talking about the Brigandine generally, what it is, how it's made, how prominent it was in the medieval period, its pros and cons, and then I'm going to be talking about what I'm wearing here. And to briefly touch on it, not in detail, but to briefly touch on it now, I need to give a shout out to the manufacturer that made this kit, which is Steel Mastery. You see, Steel Mastery contacted me and offered in exchange for one item from their selection a simple shout out. And they were very clever in doing this because usually a single item does not come near the standard values of a proper sponsorship or shout out. But when I went to their website, I saw their Brigandine, specifically this cuirass, and I was like, ooh, I like that. I really like that. And so I was like, all right, send me that one. And then after getting it, I've liked it and I love it so much. And I've been so impressed that they're not just going to get a shout, I'm going to give them a full review, okay? And a massive recommendation. So, well played, Steel Mastery, well played. Because on top of them sending me a Brigandine, when I went to their website, I also purchased out of my own money the Pauldrons and the braces, and an additional gambeson on top of the one that they're sending another gambeson, but then I bought another one on top of that because I like it so much. And some shoes. So, I made a customer out of me, right? And so anyway, shout out to Steel Mastery, great products, and overall really impressed with everything I've received from them, and I'll go into more into that later on in the video when I do the full review of this thing, and also bring down how historically authentic, plausible, or even accurate it might be. I feel like I need to put my glasses on because that's just me. Like Shad is, wears glasses now. And so how out of place is it me not wearing glasses? Because it feels like I shouldn't wear glasses when I'm wearing, authentic enough kit. Because these are, of course, modern glasses. Does it break the immersion somewhat? I don't know. Let me know in the comments, right? So a couple of weeks ago, when I first put on this kit, I posted a photo just to share that, hey, this is looking pretty good, right? And interestingly, there were a decent number of people, like, look, obviously a small minority compared to everyone who commented, but there were enough people who were saying, why are you wearing studded leather? Half of those seem to be just trolling, making jokes and fun, which is brilliant. I love a good troll, okay? I can be a bit of a troll myself at times. But then the other half legitimately seemed to think, and were being serious, that this was studded leather. And that alone has confirmed a decent amount the suspicions I have had in the misidentification of Brigandine with the rise of the fantasy trope armor studded leather, because when you're looking at this and you don't really know any better, it's fabric, it's not metal, okay, and it's got studs, and so, I mean, leather can be tanned and given a certain colour, and so studded leather. And there are a lot of images of Brigandine in historical medieval artwork, and so it's very easy to understand how people could have misidentified it, and I really think this is the genesis, the cause of the false historical armour known as studded leather, which is so popular in fantasy, particularly Dungeons & Dragons. But no, this is not studded leather, it is Brigandine. And some of you might be asking, what is Brigandine if you're not aware of it? It is a type of metal armor, okay? And it's actually a really clever, ingenious type of armor, and it, as I mentioned, was really popular in the medieval period. So why is it clever? And what is it specifically? So underneath this fabric surface are metal plates, segmented metal plates that have actually been riveted to the cloth itself, holding them in place. Now, why would you do something like that? Well, there are a number of reasons which actually kind of speaks to why Brigandine was so popular historically. First of all, it's actually a lot easier to make small metal plates than a full singular sheet. There are less chances of failure during the manufacture process, the smithing process, and if there is a failure, if there's a crack or something like that, you don't need to throw away the whole thing. You just throw away a single plate and you don't lose too many resources. So already we're seeing a lot of benefits in terms of just making the thing, and the making process is actually a lot easier, because when you're making a solid piece of metal, it takes a lot of hammering to get that shape in place, and then you have to measure it to the person. You have to make sure the thickness of the metal is uniform, and sometimes thicker in the front areas and thinner on the sides, and then make sure these plates interlock really specifically with these other large plates, and there are a lot of chances of failure. Contrast that to a Brigandine, which is made out of metal plates, and the size of the metal plates can vary, and I'll go into more detail about that when I start to talk about the different types of Brigandine and also the bit of the history of how it was developed. But just talking about the thing that is made out of smaller plates, in terms of getting it fit to the right person, it's not necessarily the shaping of the plates, but where you rivet them onto the surface, which gives it the figure and size that you want, which is a much easier process. Just going through that logical process, we can figure out pretty clearly that the Brigandine was both easier to make and therefore cheaper, because something is easier, it takes less time to make, therefore less manpower, it's more affordable. But this is confirmed in the historical records as well, because a Brigandine was worn by more common types of soldiers. Indeed, it was actually fairly popular amongst archers. The other little factoid that kind of reveals the Brigandine was more affordable or used by people who had less resources is the fact that most of them, not all, but a decent amount, open at the front. Now contrast that with a solid metal breastplate. They usually open at the sides, and because of that, they're much harder to get in and out of. Indeed, you usually need the help of a squire to wear full plate harness. But I can confirm this for myself, because the Brigandine opens at the front, you can put it on by yourself pretty easily. I do admit, getting the pauldrons attached, a little bit more fiddly, but not every Brigandine actually had pauldrons or braces attached. And the types of pauldrons and braces I'm wearing, I will explain this more in detail, are less representative of the more common types of additional arm/leg attachments that accompanied Brigandines historically. But very often the Brigandine was worn as a chest piece by itself, and I've tested that out already in a previous video to this where I'm shooting my heavy war bow. And I wanted to see what it was like shooting in just the Brigandine cuirass, and it didn't get in the way at all. It was incredibly comfortable to wear just with the cuirass. And I was even able to do a speed shooting test with the war bow with wearing the Brigandine. So range of movement didn't get in the way at all, and I can really see why an archer would be happy to wear it and would want to wear it because of the extra protective value. But in addition to just the chest piece, it was also common to have pauldrons attached to the chest piece Brigandine, as well as full arm attachments. So this is what the underside of the pauldron looks like, and as you can see, metal plates that are riveted to the fabric on top. Now, when that method is applied to, say, a full cuirass, what you gain out of that is a greater range of movement in comparison to a solid metal cuirass. One of the detriments to that is that it has far more compression, okay? But tell you what, I mean, this is very resistant. Still, if I'm hit with something really heavy, it's going to transfer more blunt force because there is no structure holding the brig separated, okay? But what I gain out of it, as I mentioned, freedom of movement. Have a look at the sides, how they can bend and compress. And look at the front, when I bend over like this, when I bend back like that. There is a wider range of movement. And I find this particularly useful with arm movement, because one of the signs of a well-made brigandine, and I've actually noticed a distinct difference between the one I'm wearing and other models I have seen. This is one of the things that attracted me towards this model in the first place, is that the side connecting arms, okay, from the sides to where it connects and straps over the shoulder, cuts in. And that's exactly what you want, because other models I've seen from the side, they just kind of went up. They didn't cut in like this, if you can see that there. And because of that, that meant when you wanted to move your arms forward, it would dig into the sides of your arms. But because this one doesn't, I have full range of motion. Look at that. Full range of motion and arms. Now, I can actually raise my arms even higher when not wearing the pauldrons. So adding the pauldrons and the braces restricts my movements a little bit more, but it doesn't, like, look at the range of movement right here, okay? That is pretty full, though there is a, right there, that's where it stops, okay? And because of that, you know, I can touch my face and everything, but I can actually bend my arm further without it on. But still, this is like effectively full movement with very little resistance. But the design of the Brigandine actually helps out an additional step, because let alone just having the right kind of proportions, there is actually additional flex on the sides where they can be pulled in. See, right here. Regularly, without the braces, I can bend my arm and grab on the sides of the brig. Can't do that with there. But the sides will compress in and out. Maybe you can see it when I do this, okay? See the chest front compressing when I put my arms together and then flexing out? If this was a solid breastplate, it wouldn't do that. I wouldn't have that additional freedom of movement with my arms, which is particularly useful if you're shooting a bow, I would say, because there's a lot of action of moving your arm around across the chest and then back and then across and back. And so you want that extra mobility, honestly, it helps. Another big benefit of the Brigandine is the fact that it'll actually fit more sizes. And I can confirm this with this model specifically as well, which of course would translate to other similar styles, is that right now, I'm wearing a very thick, fully padded gambeson underneath this Brigandine. Granted, it was not nearly as common in the 15th century to wear a full gambeson like this, and the gambeson I'm wearing is 100 or more years out of style, okay? I'm wearing an older style gambeson, so that there is a bit of an anachronism, but it's still historically plausible. And once again, I want to talk about the difference between historical plausibility and historical accuracy later on when I'm reviewing the specific Brigandine. But because the gambeson I'm wearing is so thick, it actually makes me a few sizes bigger than what I am without it. And I've worn this brig with just a linen shirt, and it fit me perfectly because I just tightened it up a little bit, got the overlap a bit more, and it was flush, perfect fit. And now, the same. I can't tighten up as much, but because I have more room to move, fits me perfectly. And it's fully closed, okay? So this is still fitting, and the overlap is complete. You could jam a knife in there, like, with a lot of effort, which is clearly one of the weaknesses of Brigandine, is getting something through or in between the plates, where you simply can't do that with a solid breastplate. But you shouldn't assume then that people always went for a solid breastplate over a Brigandine in that instance, because there are countless medieval artworks of what look to be higher nobility wearing Brigandine, okay? And I can only assume they're doing that is because they're fine with the trade-off. They like certain advantages that the Brigandine offers, and they're okay with certain disadvantages that they don't get in regards to full plate. And remember, cost is a big one, but also that freedom of movement is huge as well. But there's another really interesting element that I think plays into this, and that is fashion. Because Brigandines, by the very nature of their construction, they are made to be fixed to a fabric lining. You can pick any type of color you want on the surface. You have, and because of that, dang, they look good. Like, when I was deciding what type of armor I wanted to advance to in my own kind of kit progression, yeah, I could try and save up for a harness, a full plate harness. It would cost heaps, and right now I can't afford it, certainly. But even when I can afford it, I like the look of the Brigandine better. I think I'm going to stick with the Brig because they just look so dang good. And for me, at least, I prefer the extra mobility, the extra freedom in size, okay? I get a bit more flexibility out with what I'm wearing underneath. I like the greater range of movement, and its protective value is still phenomenal, okay? A Brig is way more protective than a male hauberk, okay? Now, oftentimes, and this is far more represented in the art, are Brigandines worn with mail underneath. For myself, too heavy. If I was ever gonna combine mail with a Brig, it's gonna be on an arming doublet with only mail sleeves. I really don't think I need the extra mail layer underneath solid metal plates, and so in terms of protective value, that's only going to offer a small marginal increase in protection for this reason. Cuts are not going to get through solid metal plates like this. In terms of blunt force impact, mail has no structure at all, so it's not going to protect you anymore with an additional layer of mail underneath this thing for blunt force. The only additional increase it might give is for piercing attacks. If you get something in between the joints of, you know, the Brig, in between the plates or, you know, the front opening, okay, mail might do the thing, because in terms of just pushing through mail, very difficult. You need a wind up to actually punch through mail, and so that could be the only reason I can kind of think of why you would want to wear mail underneath a Brig, and that would be a more exceptional situation. I know if you're in the situation where you needed mail under the Brig, you wish you would be wearing it because you'd be dead otherwise, but for the most part, from what I see, I'm very happy with the level of protection this gives me. Like, this is solid as anything. I no wonder people felt protective when wearing this. And one of the last obvious benefits about the Brigandine over other types of armor, far easier to repair. Think about this, okay? Now, in terms of plate, it is possible to dint and even punch through some of the plates. Usually, the thing that's punching through will get stuck in and won't have additional penetrative power to actually do lethal damage, and it only penetrates about that far. And so even things that punch through wouldn't generally kill someone wearing plate like this. Okay, but say that happened. You would obviously want to repair that hole, but if it was a solid metal plate, how are you going to do that? With a Brigandine, you just replace the plate, the small plate, replace it with another, re-rivet it, and you're good to go, okay? And in terms of replacing the fabric, it's a lot easier than replacing steel, so this is far more repairable and easier to do maintenance on than a full plate harness. So big advantage once again. The other thing you should understand about Brigandine, it wasn't actually one or the other. Oftentimes Brigandine was combined with solid plates. Either that was solid plate pauldrons, so these wouldn't be Brigandine plate pauldrons like I'm wearing, they'd be solid plate without the fabric on top, or other parts of the armor that was on either the arms or legs, that would be solid plate. So there's a bit of mix and matching. I do feel Brigandine should be considered in a more equivalent range to full plate because of the pros and cons. It's not just full negatives, which makes it worse, but it's more affordable, so that's why people wore it. No, people who were nobility that had money chose the Brigandine, and therefore I think it should be considered on a more equivalent plane, understanding those pros and cons, okay? Because I'm not saying it's better in every regard. I'm saying it gives certain benefits that full plate harness doesn't give. And it should be represented far more in fantasy, but absolutely the historical periods that are trying to show it. And so if we look at one of the more, recent examples, the movie The King, with the big final battle of Agincourt. If there's any place to have people wear Brigandine, it was in that battle right there. Not a single one in that whole movie, okay? I actually mentioned that when we see the knights lining up. It wasn't in the Battle of Agincourt when I mentioned this in my review, but before that I do mention, why aren't people wearing Brigandines, okay? So we need to bring it back into popularity because it's so darn cool. The Brigandine, not only is it really effective, they look awesome. Like, seriously. And this kind of then is leading into the next part in terms of the different types of Brigandine and the styles, because what I'm wearing I particularly like, but this isn't representative of one of the more common Brigandine styles, which have thinner tapered waists. They are referred to like the wasp thin type waists. In actual fact, the cuirass I'm wearing here is more representative of the transitional types of brigs between the armor that they are based from, or they developed from, and that is the coat of plates. So you can kind of see the logical progression here from mail, when you had just a mail hauberk. Solid plates were attached to them and sometimes worn in conjunction with it if it was pauldrons or other things like that. And then someone had the bright idea of fixing those plates to fabric or leather facing. And by the way, yes, leather can be on the surface of brigs, and the leather isn't the main protective thing. It's the metal plates. The leather is only serving as the surface holding them together. And so the coats of plates generally had much larger plates, sometimes just full straps like there, okay? And as they progressed and the transition happened into the brigandine, the plates started to get smaller. That's the general kind of pattern that we see. And a good example are the coats of plates and brigandines that were found at the site of the Battle of Visby. We see a wide range of types of coats of plates and also brigandines, or brigandines that are in a kind of transitional period there, where we see plates that are nowhere near as big as others. Sometimes plates that are about the size of the one I'm wearing, which is about yay big, to even smaller plates. And the smaller plates, which are like little kind of, rectangular tags almost, are actually the types of configurations that we find on some of the later styles of brigandines, especially the ones that have the tapering wasp-thin waist. So the cuirass I'm wearing isn't based off of one of those types. In actual fact, the one I'm wearing is based off of the Chalkis Type 2 brigandine, and I actually found this in my own research to try and find the type of brig that it was based on, but then I reached out to the Steel Mastery, the manufacturers, to confirm with them independently, not saying anything, what I was looking at. And they said, yeah, this is one of their interpretations of the Chalkis Type 2, and there are a couple of different interpretations that you can make of it because it's in a bit of disrepair, unfortunately. And the Chalkis Type 2 is considered an early 15th century brigandine, but far more representative of the brigandines of that period are the ones with the wasp-thin waists and made with smaller metal plates. But they're not the only type either. There is actually, it's like, do you call this a brigandine? Some people do, some people don't. It's a type of brigandine that's actually made of almost solid plates, okay? And they're riveted to fabrics, and they usually have a singular line of rivets that go in a kind of semicircular way down to the sides. Sometimes those brigs are opened at the front, so it'd be easy to put on if you don't have any help. But there are other brigs that actually seem to be just solid plates or made out of only a couple of solid plates, an upper one and a lower section. And there is very little difference between that and a full metal cuirass, apart from the fabric on the surface. And so do you call that a brig? It's a type. I would say it's a type of one. And it goes to show you how fashionable people really thought the brigandine was, with having colour on the surface. And so they even started to do that with armours that were pretty much equivalent to just solid plates. They put fabric on the top. They made rivets in a certain pattern to look stylish and stuff, because you should never underestimate the impact fashion has in nearly every walk of life, especially armour. So the brigandine needs far more love and appreciation than it is currently getting in every adaptation of the medieval period. But it also depends on which point of the medieval period you're adapting, okay? Because coats of plates, you're looking at 14th century is when they started to come in, and towards the end of the 14th century is where we see the transition from coat of plates to the brigandine, and also transitional type of models that you see me wearing. And in the 15th century, you also have transitional types like the Chalkis Type 2, and also the more classic representative one of the wasp-thin waists, and also the kind of full plate versions. But in terms of fantasy, well, in fantasy you get to be anachronistic, and you can mix and match far, far more, which actually kind of leads into the next part of this video, which is talking about the specific kit I'm wearing, a bit of a review, and also, again, shout out to Steel Mastery, because in terms of the price point, okay, this is easily one of the better models I have personally found for its price range. There are far more expensive ones that you can find people making, which are as accurate as possible to the models they're based off of. But that's not to say this isn't as accurate as possible to the model it's based off of either, okay? But in terms of quality and cost, Well, there is a difference there, but I really am impressed with the quality that this is in the price range also. Now, it's not to say it's dirt cheap. It is, costly. The cuirass, just the cuirass by itself, is €316. No, 360 euros, sorry. That equates to 416 US and about 580 Australian, which is still a hefty sum to fork out, I do admit, and that's not including the pauldrons or the braces. That's just the Brigandine cuirass by itself. But in terms of other Brigandines in this price range, this Steel Mastery one is really good quality. I've been fully impressed, and because of that, they're getting a much larger shout out than what I ever previously agreed to, because I'm just, when it's good, it's good, and when I'm happy with, what I get, there you go, so once again, well played. So as I mentioned, Steel Mastery actually let me know that the cuirass is specifically based off of the Chalkis Type 2 Brigandine, and picture right here. And there are a couple of different interpretations of that one. In terms of the plate configuration, some people say, if you look at the picture, there's only 3 layers of plates underneath the armpit. But if you actually have a look at the fabric, okay, there's rivet holes in the fabric there, indicating at least an additional layer of plates, if not 2 more additional layers. Okay, so trying to go off the evidence, this is the version that they made, and I'm really happy with it. There are a couple of small things that I'm a little concerned about, and this is part of in my review. In terms of the rivets to the fabric, okay, the braces are going to be fine because there's not a lot of movement. In terms of the chest piece, where there's going to be a lot of movement and sometimes a lot of stress on these rivet points, I'm worried that the fabric might actually pop, or rip around the rivet, and the rivet will kind of separate from it. Now, so far that hasn't been an issue, so I guess time will only tell. I do intend to be wearing this for quite a while going into the future. It's probably going to be my main outdoor video kit because it's just awesome, right? This specific kit has actually raised an interesting discussion I've had online about the historical accuracy of it and what the term historical accuracy even means. Now, some people have criticized the brig to be not accurate at all, thinking that all brigs had to have a wasp-thin waist. And that is completely incorrect, okay? It is not confirmed in the artwork or the historical surviving examples. In fact, we have several examples of front opening brigandines that do not have the tight tapered waist that seems to be more iconic or classic to the 15th century. And the Chalkis Type 2 is exactly one of those models. And so by looking at the surviving example and this reproduction, talking only about the cuirass now, not the, pauldrons and braces, the cuirass is a very faithful reproduction from what I can see. And for being so faithful in its price range, very impressive. The other concern I have is that there is an internal lining on this one. We don't know if there was an internal lining on the Chalkis Type 2, and the stitching that connects the internal lining to the face is thin, and the stitches are very separate, and I'm worried they're going to bust open. And so just for quality suggestions, I would say you might want to make the stitching, tighter and stronger, just to make sure there aren't any rips or tears in that regard. But what about these other pieces, like the pauldrons and the gambeson? Because again, this raises an interesting question on what is historically accurate, because I have usually used that term in a more loose application. If it was historically plausible, that means it's a type of accuracy, meaning it's essentially accurate enough, and I've always casually referred to that as being accurate. But some people have raised an important kind of distinction where something that is plausible doesn't necessarily mean it was accurate, and it could imply the incorrect idea. Because if something was plausible or possible, that doesn't mean it was prominent or representative. And that's significant, I do feel, because a good example is, say, swords and Vikings. When you see Viking reenactment, in my own observation, this doesn't speak to every reenactment group, and I'm not trying to be critical here, I just see a lot of swords in Viking reenactment, when historically, swords are actually quite rare, okay? They were more expensive and more prestigious. The main weapon Vikings used was the spear and then the axe, okay? Swords should not represent 80% of the weapons that, a Viking group is using, but that's generally what we see. And so, did Vikings have swords? Yes, absolutely. That is 100% accurate. But did every Viking have a sword? No. That would be inaccurate. And so we see a bit of an interesting contrast here of what actually is accurate. Because what I'm wearing here, in terms of the whole getup, the whole kit, is historically plausible, okay? These pauldrons are an interesting kind of thing to discuss because they are based off of this image right here. Now, that image requires interpretation because the proportions are a bit, they're off, they're different, okay? The head's too big in comparison to the body, so therefore, how big are the pauldrons then? Because on the image, the pauldrons clearly are coming down to the guy's shoulder. But is that the correct size in proportion to his body or the correct size in proportion to the brigandine and his head? And so it's going to take a little bit of interpretation. Now, Still Mastery went for a bigger version, these ones. And honestly, I picked these ones because of their size. I liked the look, all right? And I liked that they were more protective on top of that. And so I kind of liked that they went with that interpretation. Were they smaller? Well, we don't know. We ultimately can't know. It's an artwork. But we do know from other artworks that brigandine-style pauldrons could get very big. Like, have a look at these other examples. So this is definitely historically plausible, but we don't know if it's 100% accurate, okay? Now, the other thing to consider is how likely would it have been if pauldrons like this existed in the medieval period? Would they have been to be matched with a brigandine like this? We don't see it represented in the art. What the art gives us, we can let the artwork inform us of what the trends were, what was more popular in terms of the armor configurations of the day, and in terms of historically accurate kits. That's the type of accuracy you should aim for if you're trying to be as accurate as possible to follow the trends that we see in art to know this is what is more representative, so we don't over-represent things that would be far more unlikely or uncommon, even if they are possible. And it would be wrong to say it is historically inaccurate. And that was kind of my pushback when people were saying it was historically inaccurate, but I did listen to them and say, okay, I can see what you're saying as well. It probably isn't right to say it's completely historically accurate, even though in casual language, I generally would have called it accurate because it is far, far more accurate than it is inaccurate, if that makes sense. And that was easy enough for me to just casually say, yeah, historically accurate. And this goes the same with my gambeson. It's possible, okay, an older style gambeson with, depending on what period I'm representing. If it's early 15th century, yeah, it's possible these pauldrons would have been around. They're more representative of later styles because they're matched with the later style brigandine, but it's possible, okay. But what's far more possible is if it was the mid 15th century, you had a brig cuirass like this, which of course there were hand-me-downs and armors that were 50 years old easily that people were still wearing, and then he just got more modern style pauldrons and attached them, and so that's actually not much of a stretch at all. Now, brigs were worn with gambeson, but it's not as common as what we see mail in art, okay. When brigs are being worn, it's either with a linen tunic, shirt, or mail, and I have found one or two images that, okay, that looks like, a type of gambeson, but it's also the later style gambesons, not the earlier style I'm wearing. This is just the only one I'm wearing. But the other thing, this is where if you're going to impose a modern kind of fashion sense or aesthetic in your kit makeup, you should be more open about saying this is a more historically inspired fantasy kit, okay? Because in terms of fantasy, I'd be happy to step in the Witcher universe fully like this. And this is a very, very historically inspired kit. If not 100% accurate, it is historically plausible enough. So I've already mentioned how comfortable this one is, and I'm really happy with the quality and the price point, okay? Now, in terms of the weight, the cuirass by itself weighs about 8 kilos, which is actually considerably light. Like, it's not impactful at all wearing it by itself. Wearing everything with the pauldrons and braces comes to about 11.5 kilos, which is, interestingly enough, very equivalent to my mail hauberk. The mail hauberk by itself, not with anything else on top of it, is 12 kilos. Flat, okay? And so that's the interesting thing. I personally wouldn't want to wear a full mail hauberk with this brigandine. an arming doublet with mail sleeves, that I would be more willing to consider. Other than that, I would actually go for a gambeson, even if I was in the medieval period. If I had similar preferences based on my comfort level and the weight that I find far more manageable, this is it right here, okay? I wouldn't actually want to go too far above it because I would like to maintain my mobility, okay? My range of movement and stuff. By the way, just because I did mention my Hauberk, okay, I want to realign an idea that is being pushed, and I myself have pushed this a lot in our historical YouTube community about mail. Mail absolutely was tailored, okay, in terms of tightness and stuff like that, but to say that there were never any instances historically of mail being untailored and loose is actually incorrect. Now, if we are wanting to show someone who has a lot of money, of course, you would expect them to have properly tailored mail, as we see examples of, say, in the Morgan Bible. But here's historical artwork of untailored mail with really open long sleeves, okay? So yes, it was done historically. We just need to put that in the proper context now as to why would someone be wearing mail that would not be fitted. Inherited, okay? There's one option. Didn't have the money to get it fit, maybe because mass production. What if male shirts was just made and they didn't have anyone to match the size with, so they put it to a standard size? Very much like most of the male shirts you can buy now, they're going to be matched to a standard size, not matched to your exact size, especially, arm width and things. And as a result, it's not going to fit exact snug, okay? And there's probably going to be gaps and openings. So I just want to add that in. Interesting thing, because we're talking about armor here anyway. The plates are 1mm or 18 gauge steel. It didn't have the type of steel. I'm going to assume a mid-range steel. I don't expect carbon, okay, or high carbon, but a mid-range steel, which is also very represented in the medieval period, as a matter of fact. I'm going to caveat that. There wasn't just one type of steel, okay? Steel was also on a spectrum in the medieval period, and you have lower quality mild steels on armor, as well as higher quality carbon steels. And then there were hardened carbon steel armors and tempered, so hardened and tempered carbon steel armors. Each one of those armors are going to have different performances based on their steel quality. And so that's an important thing to consider. So when I say, mild steel or even just mild carbon steel is very representative, yes, it was, but it wasn't the only thing. You shouldn't expect all armors to be there for mild steel or medium carbon, okay? There's a range. So once again, overall, really impressed, really happy with the quality of this. And I'm going to be buying more stuff from Steel Mastery, in all honesty, because some of the best quality stuff in the price range that I've been able to find myself. So comes with a full recommendation. I give it, their chest brig a glowing review, honestly, in terms of its accuracy and quality. There were some little small, things about the stitching and also how strong the rivets will hold. Time will tell in regards to that. But what I want to do to end this video off, I want to show you the range of motion I have with a sword, okay? And I've already tried this out briefly, and it is full range of motion right here. In terms of everything that you want to do, sparring and striking, so maintaining different stances, right? There is very little restriction, none that impacts any type of movement I want to do with a weapon. Now, it's not to say there is no impact, like this motion right here, where I was rounding, okay? There is a bit of stiffness and resistance, okay? But it doesn't stop me from doing the motion that I want, all right? And like right here, to do a hanging guard, I can do it, right? But I can't raise my arms as high as I probably would like. So there are those things to keep in mind of, because with any, armor, barring perhaps a gambeson, there is going to be a mild restriction in movement. It depends on how much and if it's detrimental to the movements you need to do. And what I'm finding with, longsword, I can do all the movements I need without too much of an issue. And I attempted to test this with my longbow and discovered I was not in the physical condition to do so. I was doing a bit of labour the day before, moving around big sheets of plaster, and my arms and shoulders were really sore, so much so that I couldn't even draw the bow by itself without the pauldrons and braces on. So trying to figure out how impactful wearing the braces and pauldrons on while drawing the bow was ultimately impossible because I was too sore to even draw it without them. Therefore, I'll save that for another video. And in the meantime, I thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. And of course, please do go check out steelmastery.com. They have a wide range of awesome medieval products, and I can at least give the Brigandine cuirass as well as the pauldrons and braces a glowing recommendation. I'll put a link in the description. I hope to see you in my next video, and until that time, farewell.